Hey everyone, it's Patricia Hayes here, ready to present you with the next edition of the 15-Minute Advocate. This has been fun, you guys, over the last few days doing this. So this is video 4 in this series, and we have talked about what advocacy is. We've talked about the why of advocacy and the importance of recognizing why someone may be feeling like they're in a position of being an advocate or needing to speak up and speak out. We've talked about the how. What are the different methods and ways in which you can be an advocate? And today we are quickly approaching the when of advocacy. When should advocacy occur? Well, I could probably end this video right now with a couple of words and say all the time and call it quits, but that is too simple, right? Because it's more than just about saying all the time. It gets to more when you start looking at more details about the when of advocacy. We're talking about timeliness, but timeliness not just from a clock standpoint, right? Not just from a clock standpoint, not just from a calendar standpoint. We're talking about timeliness in a manner of ways. So we're going to talk about the timeliness of whether there's an urgency regarding an issue and how important it there. The clock or the calendar, so seasonal issues or something like that. But then also we're talking about if you're requested to do something or not. And lastly, the relevance, when it's relevant. So those are 4 different things we're going to cover quickly in this 15-minute advocate edition. So let's get to number 1. I think I laid out urgency first, and this is the one that seems to like pop up the most times, right? Because it's especially like in today's world where you have some pressing issue and it seems like there's a crisis pending or there's some action needs to be taken. You see this a lot when there's pending legislation or a policy at City Hall, or a board procedure or policy at the school district where people are making calls and they're sending home notes and whatever to say, hey, we really need you to come out like right now and to support this or to oppose this, whatever. And so that's important, because, it may be urgent. There may be a time frame because let's say the board meeting is only happening this one time and the decision is being made now or as soon as, all of the presentations have been made. So you're wanting to respond quickly so that you can help to influence the outcome of the decision that is up for grabs or in question. Same thing when you're talking about from a legislative viewpoint, whether it's your state or national level, where filing some testimony or submitting your postcards and your letters and all that, the timeliness of it is because it's an urgent situation, because the bill is going to the floor for a vote or something like that is very important. Here's the flip side of that. If an issue is not urgent right now, that doesn't mean you're not necessarily effective. However, if there was an urgency and you missed it, then you've missed your opportunity to engage. So sometimes it really is important that when you get that request to evaluate and determine whether or not it is actually something that requires a response immediately. Because most of the time, a lot of times people, unless it's something you do professionally, where you're used to getting called immediately out of the box, off the cuff to come respond to something, lots of people don't respond well. So what happens is when you are Joe Schmo advocate, right? You're just someone who has a particular viewpoint on an issue and you support it or you oppose a policy or discussion, something that's going on. What most organizations try to do is to prep their people to say, hey, this bill is going to come up for a vote in this time frame. This policy is going before the board on this date. So we want you to be aware of that because we may need you to come down. We may ask you to make phone calls, whatever. So that's how you kind of get a head start, kind of a little bit ahead of something. So before it becomes actually urgent, is your folks, if there's professional staff associated with it, then they will try to prep their supporters or folks who are supporting or opposing whatever issue is before them. If you, however, miss that opportunity, then you've missed your opportunity to engage and to make an impact. And so many times when there's something and it requires a quick response, this can be really, really crucial. So what if it's not a policy or a piece of legislation? What if this is going on with you at your job? Well, guess what? There can still be urgency. If you know the board, if you know that your boss is about to make a hiring decision in the next, let's say, week regarding a particular position, and you haven't, made your case regarding why you should be considered for it, then making your case after the decision renders you ineffective, right? So there are, that urgency issue still applies. You may approach it differently. You may approach it in a different way, in a work setting or in a community setting or whatever, but the urgency issue still applies. And so you want to be timely and be responsive when there is, quote, a level of urgency that's associated with the issue. So that's first thing. First factor of urgency. Second factor is seasonal. And what do I mean by seasonal? Well, there are things that come about, maybe it's not the next day or the next week, but maybe, let's say, it's something that happens every 3 months or once a quarter, once a year, twice a year, right? And so it's important to be prepared for that. So, for example, here in Texas, the Texas legislature only meets once every 2 years from January to May. Now, there's plenty of things that are going on during the interim time period, but if you aren't prepared for that and you haven't prepped yourself to be prepared to engage between January and May for those 140 days every 2 years, you miss your opportunity. What's another example? Another example, let's say that you work for an organization and you're trying to solicit grant funds for your organization, but the deadlines for grant submissions and considerations is, let's say, in November for the sponsoring organization that you're looking for. Well, guess what? If you miss that November deadline, you are out of luck. So the work that you would have needed to do in order to build up to that, for example, making sure you have the right contacts, make sure you provided the correct information, all the hows that we kind of talked about yesterday in video 3, then those things are relevant to the seasonal application. So you see how these things start tying together? It's really, really crucial. So sometimes, again, it may not be something that's like, oh my God, we got to deal with this right now. It may not be for a year, but that doesn't mean that you don't do anything for the next 12 months, because what it really means is there's preparation that needs to occur between then in order to address the deadline, in order to prepare for that seasonal time frame when something may come up. Because again, if a board or an organization doesn't normally make decisions in June, the deadline is in November, you can still do something, but you also should not be like hounding people because they don't make the decision in June. So for you to build up all this energy and chunk it at them in May is a waste of your time, and it makes you ineffective and it makes you look a little amateurish, right? And you see that, I've seen that for repeatedly down through the years when people are way too pushy at the wrong time. It renders you ineffective, and you don't want to be considered ineffective. So think about the seasonal aspects of what you're doing. Oh my gosh, the time is flying here. Okay, so we've talked about the urgency factor, we talked about the seasonal factor, and we're also going to talk about number 3, if it's requested. I kind of hinted at this, is sometimes when there's an organization or there's a group and they're pulling together and trying to get people to come together for a certain time frame or to address a certain issue, when you're requested to do that, that factor is really, really important, because if you do it after the fact and it's no longer needed, most of the time they're requesting your input by a certain date or a time for a reason. So you want to make sure that you can engage at that time frame, or to understand what your level of engagement should be or what's being asked of you so that you can do that. Because again, a requested timeliness, there's nothing worse than checking your email and finding out you missed the deadline for something where someone was asking for you to provide your input on a situation, and you missed your opportunity, because that opportunity may not come along again. So again, and that applies across the board, whether you're talking about it in the workplace, whether you're talking about politics, whether you're talking about a social issue. When you're requested to provide your input, it's always great to do it right at that time, because you don't know, that invitation may not stay there. I know I'm very familiar, because think about it, not only if you miss it, but if you ignore it. So let's say it's one thing if you miss it and then you acknowledge, hey, I'm so sorry I saw this, but I didn't see it in time. I was out of town, I was traveling, whatever. But if you don't even acknowledge it, what happens is the next time something comes up and someone wants input, you may not get asked. That is crucial. I know professionally, I've been there before when I've asked people over and over and they don't respond, they're non-responsive, or they don't engage, then I think they're not interested anymore, so I'm not going to ask you anymore. So you lose your voice. You lose your opportunity to provide your voice in whatever situation. So that's really, really important to respond when you've been requested, even if you've missed it, but to show that, hey, I am still interested, and should the opportunity present itself, I definitely want to be included again. Okay, so that's number 3. Number 4 is relevance. This is so important. There's nothing worse than someone providing input at an inappropriate time because what they have to say is no longer relevant to the situation. If the facts have shifted, if the people have changed, those things can make a world of difference as to what it is you provide, the information, the position, whatever. And so if you're not staying up to date on what is, to make sure that what you have to say or offer is relevant, again, it renders you ineffective, and that is not the goal. You do not want to be considered ineffective here. I'm checking my time. We're doing really good here. So you want to make sure that you stay relevant, and that means staying informed, making sure that you're up to date, asking someone, if you've been asked to engage you, it's like, hey, is there anything new that I need to know about so that I can maybe change my position? I've had that happen before, where I go completely ready to go speak about something a certain way, let's say, in the legislative setting, and I get there and they're like, hey, they have a committee substitute. It does not say anything like what the original bill says, so I have to get briefed really quickly on what the new bill says so that I can adjust my comments accordingly. Now, again, I know that's a expert level, pro level thing to do, but even when you are not the pro and you've been asked to provide something, and let's say they say, hey, were you aware that we changed the language and it now says this? What do you think? Well, just answer, honestly, I did not know that change was made. That might impact my position. I don't know that I can tell you exactly how right now, but I think it might, and I will be more than happy to continue this conversation with you offline so that I can make sure to stay engaged in the process. You see what I just did? You acknowledge not having the information, you acknowledge that you still have something that you want to say, and you acknowledge that you are willing to follow up to make sure that you provide input that is relevant. So very important. Okay, so 15 minutes goes really, really fast. What did we talk about today? We talked about the win of advocacy and the factors that are important to consider in order to make sure that you are still an effective advocate. Talking about the urgency and being responsive in an urgent situation. About seasonal aspects, when it may be a quarterly, biannually, or annually when you need to engage on an issue, and making sure you do that in a timely fashion. Thirdly, doing it when you're requested, because if you ignore a request, you may miss out on your opportunity to engage in the future. And finally, making sure you stay relevant. The timeliness of staying relevant and making sure you're up to date is so important as well. Okay, oh my gosh, I love doing these, and I'm so looking forward to continuing that. I look forward to getting your input, getting some more of your questions if you have any. I love getting that, because what I do is I feed off of it and I'll develop content that is relevant to your specific questions. And so I'm looking forward to that. So post any questions or comments in the comment section below, or if you're a little shy, PM me. And that's our timer saying that our time has run out. But But make sure to there we go. Make sure to let me know, and I'll be, I said it. I'm going to continue doing these, the 15-minute advocate. I'm going to do some more in this series, and then I think we're going to go to a weekly on the 15-minute advocate. But if you're needing more in-depth training on specific things, PM me, message me on those as well, because I am available to do those types of things as well. And I'm also in the midst of planning the Advocacy Academy, which is going to be a 5-day virtual opportunity for you to learn some more things in depth. So just hit me up in the comments. I look forward to working with you, and take care until tomorrow. Bye-bye.